Tonight, we step into the twilight world of the Roman legion, where steel and sentiment intertwined. We'll ask, why did Roman soldiers write love poems at dusk, from makeshift inkpots by the campfire to hidden verses exchanged under the stars? These letters reveal tender hearts behind the armor. As the sun sank behind the rolling hills of Germania, the stone ramparts of the Limes Castorum, Rome's frontier defense, glowed with an amber hush. Legionaries paused mid-stride, their armor catching that final fleeting light, as if forged from the dusk itself. Among them stood centurion Gaius Marcellus, his broad shoulders cloaked in a crimson sagum, the woolen blanket of command. Across his scarred cuirass, the silver fittings glinted, and the eagle-shaped fibula at his throat caught the dying rays. Yet tonight, duty was edged with longing. In his hand, Gaius held not a sword, but a small reed pen, freshly trimmed and dipped into wine-dark ink. Gaius chose a spot atop the earthen embankment, overlooking the dense timber beyond. 1,000 paces away, the forest whispered with unseen life. The click of stag hooves, the rustle of boar in underbrush, and the occasional owl's lament. Here, at the empire's periphery, the boundaries of civilization and wilderness met in a silent breath. He unrolled a thin sheet of parchment, meticulously smoothed in advance, and began, the graceful script of his verses winding across the surface like a ribbon. Each letter was a tremor of emotion, each word a confession of a heart concealed behind the visage of a hardened soldier. He wrote of her black curled hair, like midnight's velvet, and of her laughter, the silver laughter that outshone our camp's torches. The scent of damp earth rose around him, mingling with the faint tang of oiled leather and the musk of his fellow soldiers settling into their tents. Every few lines, Gaius paused, closing his eyes to taste the memory behind the ink. He pictured Valeria, her gentle smile at dawn, the way she smoothed her stola before stepping into the marketplace of Aquileia. He felt the weight of miles between them, the cold nights that lay ahead, and the hard truth that this letter might never reach her, lost among dispatches or confiscated by superior officers. Yet he wrote on, each stroke an act of defiance against the discipline that demanded stoicism above all. Behind him, a pair of sentries drumrolled the approaching hour. The twilight watch was beginning. The rhythmic thump of leather-strapped drums echoed along the wall, sending a shiver through the gathering shadows. Gaius paused, ink-stained fingers hovering above the parchment. He lowered his hand, breathing slowly, listening as the world shifted from day's clamor to night's hush. He tucked the pen behind his ear, then gathered the parchment into a slender scroll. With cautious care, he slid it into the lining of his cloak, a hidden treasure against the cold. Upon sealing it with a tiny wax blob pressed by the flat of his signet ring. As he retraced his steps to the praetorium, torchlight danced along the wall, painting flickering runes in orange and gold. His boots tread softly on packed earth, and in the hush, he sensed the companionship of countless others who had done the same. Soldiers and scribes, engineers and sentinels, each concealing their yearnings beneath armor and orders. Within the camp's inner courtyard, lanterns swung in the breeze, illuminating tables where scribes catalogued supplies. Gaius passed the central tent, where legates conferred over maps, resisting the urge to peek inside. Instead, he climbed a short ladder to the rampart walk, leaning against the cold parapet stones. Below him, the camp settled. Horses nickered in their stalls, cooking embers glowed red in iron cauldrons, and the low murmur of conversation faded as men retreated to tents. High above, the first stars emerged. Cassiopeia's chair, the Great Bear, and the faint dust of the Milky Way hung like a pale ribbon. The heavens felt vast, timeless, unchanged since Rome's founders, unchanged since the gods first spoke through omens and auguries. Yet here on the Limes, human hearts still beat with the same desires: to love, to remember, to hope. Gaius pressed the scroll against his chest, feeling the reassuring weight of papyrus and purpose. The threats beyond, barbarian warbands massing in the forest, rumors of revolt in distant provinces, seemed distant now, muted by the intimacy of his words. In this twilight hour, poet and warrior merged, and the empire's might softened into a simple act of writing love. Slowly, he and whispers to the empty sky, "May these words find her safe." Then, as night fully claimed the borderlands, he stepped back into the lantern-lit path, ready to resume his role as centurion, steel-armed, battle-ready, yet carrying something far more fragile: the echo of a soldier's love at dusk. As night deepened across the Campo, the Roman fort's central plaza glowed in concentric rings of amber light. At its heart, a low, crackling fire sent sparks dancing into the dark canopy above. Here gathered the legion's support staff, engineers, artificers and scribes, drawn by warmth and the promise of a brief respite. Among them crouched Lucius Fabius, the unit's youngest scribe, his tunic smeared with ink and charcoal from hours spent cataloguing grain shipments. He sat cross-legged on a flat stone, knees almost brushing the hilt of his gladius, quill clutched in one hand and a half-filled wax tablet balanced on the other. Lucius's dark hair fell in damp ringlets around a sculpted forehead, and his keen green eyes reflected the firelight as he murmured verses under his breath. The others, at the wild tales of frontier beasts he'd recorded by day, but tonight he was lost in a different task. He had scraped a clean wax tablet, turned it face down, and was embossing tiny letters on the wooden back, lines of love poetics too fragile to withstand standard inspection. These secret verses, written in elegiac couplets, would never be seen by commanding officers. They were meant for a single pair of eyes. He dipped his quill into a small, battered inkwell, a hollowed olive pit filled with ink, and traced the opening words. "Beneath these oaks our fates entwine, as stars above outshine your eyes." Each stroke was careful, precise. Lucius's hand steady despite the chill that crept through the night air. Beside him, a veteran centurion's helmet rimmed with soot, serving as a makeshift inkpot lid. When Lucius paused, he tapped the quill's tip against the rim, removing excess drops that might mar the smooth wax. A short tar rose from the circle. The fort's engineer, Crispus, was sharing a humorous anecdote about an overturned cart. Hanky rippled like a gentle stream through the group, but Lucius scarcely noticed. He focused on the tablet's back, feeling the cool wood under his fingers as he wrote of whispered promises beneath the same oaks that sheltered their camp. He imagined the slender hand of Aemilia, the freedwoman who bought her own stall in Ostia's market, tracing these lines, her fingers pausing on each Latin syllable. Shoulders hunched against the night's damp, Lucius reached into his satchel and withdrew a folded scrap of papyrus, carefully preserved from the day's dispatches. On its front, he had already penned a conventional account of forage gathering beyond the fort's palisade. But on the reverse lay his true message, a sonnet of hope and longing. He laid the papyrus next to the tablet, then pulled from his pockets a tiny strip of lead, an improvised seal. Pinching it between thumb and forefinger, he pressed it into a ribbon of hot wax trailing from a nearby candlestick. When the wax cooled, Lucius rolled the papyrus scroll and slipped it into a narrow leather sheath, small enough to hide beneath his tunic. He pressed it close to his chest, feeling the reassuring weight. Heart hammering, he scanned the circle of flickering faces, then quietly rose and backed away into the shadows, taking care not to shush the laughter. At the edge of the firelight, he paused by the sentry post, where two legionaries nodded a silent greeting before rejoining their patrol. Behind the cookhouse, Lucius found a sheltered nook between stacked granaries. He crouched again, retrieved the sealed scroll, and tapped his stylus, a small metal pin, against the wooden wall, creating a faint Morse-like series of knocks. A rustle in the darkness answered him. Amelia emerged, her stola folded beneath a woolen wrap, lantern in hand. The lantern threw her features into soft relief. High cheekbones, gentle curve of her lips, and hair coiled into an intricate braid. Their eyes met, and Lucius offered the scroll with trembling fingers. Amelia accepted it, gingerly untying the leather sheath and peeling back the wax seal. She read in silence, her face shifting from surprise to a warm glow. By firelight and soft lantern glow, Lucius watched as she traced each line with a fingertip. He dared not breathe too deeply, afraid to shatter the fragile moment. When she looked up, her smile was all the reply he needed. They pressed forearms together in a brief, silent embrace, then turned back toward the main plaza. Lucius lit one last stick of kindling at the fire's edge, sending a small plume of smoke skyward, a signal that all was well. As the two slipped hand in hand toward the camp's inner corridors, the embers faded and the night reclaimed its quiet sovereignty. As dawn stretched its pale fingers over the rolling hills of the Transalpine province, the morning mist clung to the statuesque columns of the Praetorium like a diaphanous veil. Inside its cool marble halls, Praetorian guard Flavia Octavia glided between mosaic floors that shimmered with tesserae of blue, gold, and white. Her stola, crafted from fine Tyrian purple silk, brushed the ground as she moved, the delicate embroidery of laurel wreaths tracing her silhouette. A slender bronze fillet held her dark curls in place atop her head, the metal leaves catching stray light in a soft gleam. Assigned to ceremonial duties, Flavia was renowned for her composure and precision. Yet beneath the disciplined exterior, her heart beat with secret longing. For weeks, she'd watched Tribune Marcus Valens, son of a senator, dictate edicts from his ivory chair, his crisp white toga draped with a single purple stripe of rank. He was everything her world forbade, patrician, powerful, and destined for Rome's highest echelons. But in stolen glances across the courtyard, she had glimpsed a gentleness in his eyes that rivaled the marble gods. This morning, like many before, Flavia entered the tribune's office to deliver the day's dispatches. The rooms smelled of papyrus, beeswax, and the faint musk of sandalwood oil. Marcus looked up from his scroll-covered desk, his gaze planting itself firmly upon her. He rose, towering over her by half a head, and inclined his head in a curt nod. His toga fell in perfect folds around him, and the laurel crown resting on his brow spoke of recent victory in the games held at Lugdunum. Flavia's pulse quickened as she presented the missives. With a graceful, practiced motion, she removed a sealed letter from beneath the stack, an elegant scroll bearing no official insignia. Marcus caught the glint of her bronze fillet as she extended the parchment. He hesitated just long enough for Flavia to note the curious crease at its edge, a telltale sign of hurried folding. Once the door had clicked shut behind her, Flavia's breath trembled in her chest. She retreated to the marble balcony overlooking the central atrium, where fountains whispered against sculpted stone lions. There, she paused at a well-polished balustrade, her reflection mingling with the morning sun's dance on the water below. A flicker of shame, or was it anticipation, passed over her features as she fingered the lower edge of her stola's sleeve. Within the scroll lay verses written the previous dusk, when Marcus slipped a note into her hand during a routine inspection. His words had been both bold and tender. Softly. O Flavia, within your hardened shield, a softer heart than any legions yield. Each dawn I yearn for your quiet grace, your whispered name, my sweetest fate. She recalled the exhilaration of reading those lines beneath the olive trees outside the fort's gate. The cicadas had sung their afternoon hymn as she pressed the parchment to her lips, feeling the echo of his voice in every Latin cadence. Now, perched on the balcony's edge, Flavia unfolded the new scroll. Her fingers brushed the wax seal, a stylized laurel wreath entwined with the letters M.V., before she broke it with deliberate slowness. The parchment exhaled against her fingertips, unfolding like a secret bloom. As Rome's banners catch the dying light, so does my soul catch fire at your sight. Though duty binds our paths apart, you reign supreme within my heart. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she traced each phrase. The language was simple, yet its sincerity seared through her disciplined veneer. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes to let the words sink in. The air was cool against her cheeks, carrying the scent of citrus groves beyond the city walls and the distant murmur of traffic along the Via Praetoria. Suddenly, the distant clang of booted feet on marble heralded the tribune's return. Flavia snapped the parchment shut, securing it beneath her tunic and smoothing her stola with a flourish. She stood tall, composed, as Marcus re-entered, brow furrowed in concentration. His gaze flicked to her stola's embroidered wreaths, then settled on her face. "Good morning, Flavia," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "You look radiant in this light." Her cheeks warmed. She inclined her head, careful not to let her heart betray her. "Your victory wreath suits you as well, Tribune," she replied, steadying her voice. Matter-of-factly, "News from the North Camp has arrived." He accepted the sealed dispatch, and with a measured bow, Flavia guided him back through the colonnade. At the far end, she halted, offering a courteous nod. Only when he had passed did she exhale, turning away to lean against the cool stone column, the weight of his praise still echoing in her mind. Later that afternoon, under the vaulted corridors of the Praetorium's library, Flavia found her sanctuary. Tall shelves of scrolls towered around her, and shafts of sunlight filtered through narrow windows high above. Here, among dusty tomes of history and law, she felt free to breathe. Retrieving Marcus's morning verses, she began drafting her reply on a fresh piece of papyrus. Her handwriting was firm and elegant, each letter formed with unwavering confidence. She wrote of admiration for his victories, both on the field and in his governance, and wove in her own confession of how his words had brightened her dawn. As she wrote, a figure emerged from the stacks. Aulus Septimius, the Praetorium's chief archivist, his robes trailing behind him like a river of white. He paused, eyeing her scroll. Flavia's heart lurched. Aulus was meticulous in guarding official records, and frowns often masked his scrutiny. "Annoyed. Guarding state secrets again, Flavia," he mused, voice dry as parchment. She offered a polite smile. "Only those worth keeping safe, archivist." Aulus raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, turning on his heel to continue his rounds. Flavia watched his retreating form until he disappeared around a corner. Then she folded her parchment neatly, binding it with a slender leather thong. Before slipping it into a hidden pocket of her stola, she pressed her thumb against the seal she had crafted, an intertwined F.O., entwined with a tiny laurel sprig. That evening, as torches lit the Praetorium's grand courtyard, Flavia ventured once more to the balcony. Beneath her, the legionaries filed in formation for the evening muster, the glow of their armor reflecting the torchlight in a procession of molten gold. Flavia watched them, mind far from military protocol. At her side, Marcus emerged from the shadows, crown still perched upon his brow. He offered a slight bow. "I trust you received my verses." She extended her hand, palm up. He placed her reply into it, their fingers brushing in a fleeting touch that sent a familiar warmth racing through her veins. "Until tomorrow's dusk," he whispered. She lowered her gaze, willing herself to speak with calm resolve. "May the gods preserve your guard," she replied, voice soft as a prayer. He nodded, then withdrew into the darkness. Flavia watched him go, clutching the parchment to her heart. The torchlight danced around her, casting her laurel wreath in sharp relief against the stone. In that moment, the fortress walls, symbols of Rome's unyielding might, felt transformed into the quiet stage for a love as courageous and timeless as the empire itself. The dawn drumbeat rose before the sun cleared the eastern ridge, calling the legion to its daily march along the winding Roman road. Shields clattered against leather thongs. Hobnailed caligae struck the gravel in measured cadence. Among the steady ranks strode Marcus Severus, a veteran of 20 campaigns, his once bright lorica segmentata, now dulled by dust and countless skirmishes. His faded red cloak was pinned at the shoulder with a simple bronze fibula, and the scabbard of his gladius, worn smooth at the edges, bore the scrawled initials MS, carved in stolen moments the night before. Beside him marched Gaius Rufus, a younger recruit whose first year of service shone in the clean lines of his armor and the eagerness in his dark brown eyes. He adjusted the leather strap of his pugio, nodding respectfully to Marcus as they fell step for step. Each carried a rolled-up papyrus scroll tucked into their balteus, concealed beneath their belts. Verses waiting to be unfurled when the road stretched silent once more. As they trudged through oak groves, whose leaves whispered in the morning breeze, Marcus broke the silence. "Recite it again, will you, Rufus?" he asked, voice low yet clear against the clamour of marching feet. Gaius glanced to his senior partner and offered a small smile. "Only if you promise not to laugh, centurion." He drew the scroll and unfurled it carefully, smoothing out the edges with ink-stained fingertips. "Through dusty miles and endless dawn, your image leads me gently on. Each cobblestone beneath my tread beats echoes of the words you've said." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the rhythm synchronize with his heartbeat. He inhaled the forest's damp scent and let the lines settle into his mind. Dawnlight filtered between branches, casting lacy shadows on the columned line of soldiers. The road ahead veered eastward toward the Rhine, and beyond it, rumors of unrest made hearts both resolute and anxious. When Gaius finished, he rolled the papyrus and tucked it back beneath his belt. He looked up at Marcus, whose usually stern features had softened. "Your turn," he said. Marcus hesitated, then withdrew his own scroll, its edges frayed from repeated handling. His script was bolder, more practiced, and the ink had barely dried. "Though miles divide our souls apart, your name pulses in this soldier's heart. Oh, let the west wind bring you near, and carry whispered love in ear." Gaius inhaled sharply, a faint flush rising in his cheeks. The private nature of the sentiments stood in stark contrast to the empire's grand march of conquest. Around them, the legion tramped on, oblivious to these fleeting verses that wove tenderness into the iron discipline of Rome's finest. They paused at a man-made ford where sluggish waters lapped at the road's stone causeway. Centurion Lucilla, one of the rare female officers overseeing the unit's engineers, was supervising the repair of a collapsed archway. Her braided hair was pinned beneath a leather cap, and her striking violet-dyed cloak marked her rank. She nodded curtly to Marcus and Gaius, then turned back to her work without comment. The two men seized the moment to exchange folded scrolls, fingertips brushed as they swapped their poems, each reading the other's lines in a silent communion. A gust of cool air rippled through the grove, capturing the scent of wet stone and fresh-cut timber. Marcus unfolded Gaius's poem once more, reading it aloud in a hushed timbre. "When twilight finds the camp aflame, I whisper softly your sweet name. With every step, my spirit soars, until I rest on distant shores." His voice wavered slightly on the last word. Gaius watched him closely, noting how the centurion's stern jaw relaxed, and the corner of his mouth quirked in a half-smile. Then Marcus folded the scroll and slipped it into his cloak, reaching out to clasp Gaius's forearm in a soldier's gesture of solidarity and something more intimate. The day's march resumed. The road straightened, crossing rolling meadows where wild flowers brushed the daylight. Legionaries hummed marching tunes, while wagon drivers coaxed tired mules along rutted wheel tracks. Somewhere ahead, the deep toll of a bell marked the hour, and smoke from cooking fires drifted into the sky. As they walked, Marcus spoke, softly. "Your words give me strength," he confessed. I've led men through storms and sieges, but this longing, cuts deeper than any blade." Gaius met his gaze. "Love may be the fiercest campaign we face," he replied. They stopped at noon beneath an ancient sycamore, its gnarled roots rising like the coils of a sleeping serpent. The legion set down tents and prepared a quick meal of salted pork and hard bread. Marcus and Gaius retreated to sit on a moss-covered stone a few paces from the main encampment. There, they shared a small waterskin and unfolded their scrolls again, reading back and forth until the midday shadows lengthened. While the two men shared poetry, the camp beyond bustled with activity. Soldiers tended their armor. Scribes recorded the day's progress, and a few walked to a nearby stream to wash soot from their arms. This ordinary scene of military life underscored the extraordinary nature of the secret Gabriel and Marcus preserved, a human tenderness wrapped in the folds of imperial ambition. As the sun inched westward, the pair rolled up their scrolls one final time. Marcus stood, tucking the papyrus deep within his tunic. Gaius rose too, brushing crumbs from his tunic and reholstering his dagger. They clasped forearms again, a silent vow to meet once more beyond the kilometers of road that lay ahead. In the gathering dusk, the legion formed ranks for the evening muster. The drum rolled again, and torches were lit along the roadside. Marcus and Gaius rejoined their centuries, marching back into the column of disciplined precision, yet in their hearts the tender verses travelled ahead, a private beacon guiding them through the empire's unending circuits and carrying the promise of reunion with every measured step. When the camp's torches guttered low and the watchtower's lanterns swung in the gentle night breeze, the legion's smithy fell silent. Sparks had long ceased to fly, and the clang of hammer on iron gave way to the soft chorus of cicadas. Beneath the pale orb of the full moon, private moments emerged from the shadow of military precision. Here, by the forge's cold anvil and the discarded shields of the day, young recruit Titus Valerian found his secret canvas. Titus was slight of frame, his shoulders still filling into the weight of armor, and his hair, the color of dark wheat, curled damply against his brow. His greaves, polished only weeks ago, bore tiny scuffs from training maneuvers. His tunic, stitched at the shoulder with spare cloth, was pulled snug beneath the segmented tiles of his lorica. In his hand, he carried a simple dagger, not the gladius of a seasoned soldier, but a shorter blade, more suited to close work, and tonight to delicate carving. He selected a discarded scutum from the pile, a shield boss dented in a training drill. The circular boss, once gleaming bronze, now lay mottled with dark patina. Kneeling on the hard-packed earth, Titus removed a scrap of cloth from his belt and wiped away soot until he revealed a clean circle. He set the dagger's blade against the metal, angling it just enough to scrape away a thin line. With each careful stroke, he etched two names in concentric curves, Julia on the outer ring, Titus on the inner. Around them he carved tiny hearts and twisted vines, the grooves catching moonlight like mirrored threads. His breath was measured, eyes narrowed in focus. There was no hurry, only the urgent need to immortalize his affection where no sensor's eye could reach. As he worked, memories of Julia drifted through his mind. The afternoon he'd escorted her through the autumn vineyards of Narbo Martius, their laughter echoing against sun-warmed stone, the soft brush of her hand at his elbow as she pointed out her favorite cask of honeyed wine. He could still taste the faint sweetness on his tongue, a lingering echo that quickened his pulse. A distant owl hooted, and Titus paused to rest his wrist. The silver needle of the moon traced gentle arcs across the sky, illuminating the ramparts and the silent rows of tents. Somewhere beyond, the Rhine whispered against its marshy bank. For a moment, soldier and nature stood in quiet accord, each breathing in the same cool night air. Repositioning himself, Titus resumed his carving, this time adding a final flourish. Two clasped hands, outlined in shallow relief, a vow of fidelity bound by metal. The last line read, in diminutive letters along the boss's edge, Ad lucem et tenebras, through light and shadow. When the inscription was complete, Titus laid down his dagger and ran a calloused thumb over the fresh grooves. The metal was still cool, but its promise warmed his heart. He lifted the scutum and propped it upright against a nearby anvil, stepping back to admire the hidden artistry. Behind him, footsteps crunched. He turned to see Corporal Marcus Litus, who oversaw the armourers and smiths. Marcus's salt and pepper hair gleamed beneath his iron helm. His broad chest rose and fell beneath battered lorica, and the folds of his rust-red cloak whispered of battles past. He surveyed the boss with practiced eye, noting the precision of each line. "Creative work again, Titus?" Marcus asked, voice low so none but the two would hear. Titus nodded. "Just personalizing a training scutum, sir." Marcus crouched, running a gauntleted finger along the carved vine. "These hands," he murmured. "They're well done." He looked up at Titus. "Who's the lucky lady?" Titus hesitated, then offered a tight smile. "Iulia, sir. A merchant's daughter back in Narbo." The corporal straightened, placing a firm hand on Titus's shoulder. "May she appreciate it someday." He paused, glancing at the moonlit sky. "But be mindful, soldier. This shield will see the front lines soon. Consider it both your armor and your message, in case words fail." Titus swallowed, a flicker of pride mixing with apprehension. "Yes, Corporal, I understand." Marcus gave a nod, then straightened. "Good, keep it safe." He turned and strode back toward the forge, where bundled tools lay under a tarpaulin. His lantern cast dancing shallows on the ground as he disappeared into the gloom. Alone once more, Titus retrieved a length of leather thong from his pouch and laced it through two small holes he had punched at the shield boss's rim. The strap allowed him to slip the scutum over his back like a backpack, ready for inspection at dawn, yet forever bearing the secret vow etched in bronze. He gathered his dagger and cloth, stacking them neatly along the forge's edge, before slipping into the tent where his sentry made its quarters. The canvas flap whispered shut behind him, and the hush of blankets brushing canvas filled the small, crowded space. Under his cot, he stowed the shield boss wrapped in oilskin, a silent talisman for the battles to come. Before sleep claimed him, Titus whispered into the darkness, "Ad lucem et tenebras, Iulia." His eyes closed. He pictured her smile beneath the grapevines, and the night carried his promise into the quiet frontier air. As twilight settled like a soft veil over the legionary camp, rhythmic echoes threaded through the tents and palisades. The steady beat of the military drum, far more than mere timekeeper of march or muster, was the heartbeat of the frontier itself. Among the handful of women serving alongside the legion was Aelia Carina, the camp's principal drummer, and tonight, beneath her leather straps and embroidered tunic, her own heart set a secret tempo. Aelia was of medium height, with strong, sinewy arms honed by years of wielding mallet and stave. Her dark hair was bound in a tight coil at the nape of her neck, hidden beneath a simple leather cap threaded with the legion's emblem. Her tunic, dyed a mute olive green and trimmed with embroidered white dactylic motifs, spoke of her dual role, a scholar of poetry and a metronome of war. Around her waist, she wore a broad leather belt from which hung two small drums, a tabor slung low against her hip, and a tambourine-like framed drum fashioned from stretched deer hide. Tonight was the first full moon since Midsummer's Day, and Aelia had volunteered for the midnight watch. As the camp settled into the hush between cockerel's last crow and the owl's first call, she stepped into the lantern-lit clearing before the praetorium. Legionaries lounged on their blankets, half asleep, while sentries fired torches in rhythmic arcs above. In the center, Aelia positioned herself, drawing her mallets with deliberate reverence. Her first role was a soft murmur, a gentle reminder that even in rest, the legion kept its vigil. Each tap of the hide resonated through the chilled air, a pulse that blended with the low scythes of the Rhine beyond the ramparts. But as her hands found their flow, Aelia allowed something more intimate to unfold. Between the measured beats, she hummed a soft Latin verse, one composed just days ago beneath the same sky. When midnight's veil enwraps the plain, your name I summon in each refrain. The metrical pattern, dactyls echoing the drum's triple pulse, transformed her performance into a coded serenade. Only Marcus Flavian, the young signifer, standard-bearer who lived in the adjacent tent, would recognize the subtle variations. He had learned the poem's stanzas from Aelia in whispered lessons by the forge, where she transcribed the lines onto scraps of birch bark between mending metal. Her rhythms quickened, then softened, weaving a tapestry of sound that lulled even the most restless sentinel. Sparks from torches flickered on polished armor as soldiers stirred in their sleep, lulled by the drum's hypnotic cadence. In the distance, the forest sighed, and the moon's reflection shimmered on the water-filled ditches. At the close of her set, Aelia allowed the final note to linger, the mallets hovering above the drumhead, as if reluctant to break the spell. She placed them aside and retrieved a small wax tablet from the drum's leather sling. With the tip of her stylus, she inscribed one more couplet in neat, looping script. May dactyls guide your silent march, till dawn unites us 'neath the arch. Sealing the tablet in a folded scrap of leather, she slipped it into the lining of her belt. The delivery would come later, passed through the quartermaster's hands as an innocuous tally of drum supplies. A rustle at the edge of her clearing signaled Marcus's approach. The signifar stood tall, his standard's eagle spear silhouetted against the moonlit sky. He bowed his head in respect before offering a faint smile. "Your rhythms keep us safe," he whispered, voice low enough that only Aelia could hear. "And your verses, they keep me alive." Aelia returned his smile with a soft nod. Her hands itched to beat another rhythm, but she restrained them, knowing the secret heartbeat must remain unheard by all but her intended. They lingered for a moment, two silhouettes framed by lantern glow and starlight, before Marcus dipped his head and returned to his post. Aelia gathered her drums, her firmer pace softening into the camp's muted breaths. With each step she carried the echo of her own melody, and the knowledge that love, like the drum's cadence, could bridge the vast distances of empire. As dawn's rosy fingers brushed the white marble columns of the legion's headquarters, Tribune Marcia Severina entered the office of the legate with measured purpose. The air inside smelled of beeswaxed scrolls and imported cedar, luxuries that marked her station among Rome's elite. Draped in a pristine linen tunic, embroidered with purple stripes, the Praetorian mark of rank, she carried a polished wooden desk box filled with dispatches destined for the Senate in Rome. Each scroll bore the imperial seal and detailed the legion's movements, supply inventories, and intelligence from the frontier. Marcia placed the box atop the heavy oak table, its carved lion's paws resting on soft, rush-mat flooring. She turned to the legate, a stern-faced veteran named Lucius Aemilius, his silver hair cropped short beneath his helmet. He nodded curtly, then beckoned her to present the first bundle. Her fingertips brushed the edges of the neatly rolled scrolls, each tied with crimson ribbon and stamped with the Aquila emblem. Soldiers had spent weeks gathering the minutiae, grain quantities, troop rotations, local tribal allegiances. But Marcia carried her own private charge, a hidden missive for her husband, Centurion Quintus Severus, stationed 3 provinces away. Lucius unsealed the first dispatch, scanning the neat columns of Latin text, describing skirmishes along the Danube. Marcia watched his keen, grey eyes flit over the lines of official report that masked a softer undercurrent. When he moved on to the second scroll, she seized the moment. With deft fingers, she lifted the third dispatch and slipped it back into her box, replacing it with a nearly identical scroll upon which she had forged the imperial seal herself. This fake dispatch, outwardly indistinguishable, contained 2 parts. The first half was an exact copy of the genuine report, regiment movements, forage requisitions, and a summary of the latest espionage gleaned from barbarian merchants. It was the perfect camouflage. In the margin of the second half, Marcia had penned a brief postscript, an elegiac couplet dedicated not to Rome but to Quintus. "My dearest heart, though distance claims our days, each moon I count the nights till homeward gaze." She rolled the scroll with meticulous care, tying it with the same crimson ribbon that adorned the others. Her seal, a small impression of 2 interlocked rings, was pressed into the wax just as confidently as the Aquila crest. Only she knew which impression belonged to which destinies. Marcia lifted the desk box and approached the heavy bronze door, its surface engraved with scenes of past triumphs. She paused before departing, inhaling the sharp scent of ink and leather. Somewhere in Rome, her husband would break open this scroll, expecting the latest orders from the Praetorian Guard. Instead, he would find her words, her heart laid bare on papyrus. Outside the legate's office, footmen lined the corridor, poised to carry the dispatches on via relays to the provincial courier. Marcia nodded to the stern face of her aide, Gaius Pollio, a young officer entrusted with the genuine dispatches. He dipped his head in acknowledgement, unaware of the swapped bundle hidden beneath his cap. Once Gaius and the footman were gone, Marcia returned to her desk. She opened a small lacquered box on the corner. Inside lay a folded scrap of parchment inscribed with Quintus's last letter to her. She unfolded it and read the final lines by the light of an oil lamp. My Marcia, the Danube winds like your dark hair, and each bend echoes your laughter. Return soon. My heart awaits beneath our laurel tree. Marcia's cheeks warmed at the memory of those lines. Closing her eyes, she allowed herself a single breath of longing, tasting the ink's faint earthiness. Then she smoothed the parchment, folded it back into its box, and secured the lid. Duty reclaimed her. Rome demanded no hesitation. The morning sun climbed higher as Marcia stepped out onto the veranda overlooking the parade grounds. Legionaries drilled below in perfect formation, their red shields flashing in unison. She watched their synchronized movements with pride, even as her thoughts drifted to the handsome visage of Quintus, his strong jaw set in determination, the way his hazel eyes crinkled when he smiled. A pair of centurions approached, saluting her with crisp motions. They paused to salute again when she gave the order to begin the day's inspection. As the men stood at attention, Marcia lifted her voice, calm, confident, authoritative. Calm, confident, unmistakably authoritative. The morning's work resumed, ranks marched, standards fluttered, and the wheels of Rome's might turned seamlessly onward. But in the folds of one sealed scroll, an act of love moved as decisively as any legion. In the silent spaces between words, Marcia's heart welcomed the promise of reunion, carried swiftly along well-trodden roads, back to the man she cherished more than any victory. The moon hung low over the encampment like a pale sentinel, its silver light slipping between the quilted flaps of canvas tents. By this hour, most legionaries lay wrapped in coarse wool blankets, their steady breathing a low chorus beneath the night sky. Yet for Optio Julia Domitia, second in command of the 2nd century, the stillness of midnight offered sanctuary for forbidden pursuits. Julia's helmet, bright polished in the day's drills, now rested on a wooden stool beside her woven cot. Her armor lay folded on a rack, breastplate, lorica segmentata, greaves stacked in neat order. She wore instead a simple linen tunic dyed midnight blue, its sleeves trimmed with thin silver braid, a gift from her mother. Her dark hair was pulled back into a loose knot, the strands freed at the nape to catch moonlight like mercury. Barefoot and silent, she knelt at the narrow slit where her tense flap had been partially unlatched, allowing the cool night air to drift in. From beneath her cot, she retrieved a small hand-stitched pouch of papyrus scrolls. Each had been penned in the waning light of dusk, ink still faintly aromatic with oils used to preserve the fibers. The outermost scroll bore the seal of Centurion, Lucius Marcellus, Julia's mentor and the object of her clandestine devotion. To any other, it was an official order regarding fortifications. To her, it was a love letter hidden in plain sight. Julia eased the scroll free of its ribbon and unrolled it on her lap. The wax seal, a stylized wolf's head, cracked softly under her fingertips. She read, whispering each line so only the shadows would hear. Beneath the watchful stars we stand, two souls joined by duty's hand. Though steel and orders bid us part, you reign eternal in my heart. Her breath caught at the final phrase. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the quick drum of her own pulse. Outside, a solitary dog barked in the distance, the sound swallowed by the forest beyond the palisade. With trembling fingers, Julia reached for her stylus, a thin bone tool carved from an ibis feather, and prepared her reply. She selected a blank scroll and, by the faint glow of a whetstone lantern, began to compose in her neat italic script. O Lucius, when dawn paints shields in gold, my thoughts fly where your arms enfold. Let each new day our promise prove, united souls in steel and love. Each word felt weighty, as if etched into her very spirit. She paused to dip the stylus into a vial of perfumed oil, lightly brushing it over the parchment surface to protect the ink. Then she tied the scroll with a slender leather thong and sealed it with wax, formed from bulrushes gathered near the Rhine. Julia pressed the seal, a wolf's paw imprint, into the tacky wax, then slipped the scroll into a narrow pocket hidden beneath her cot's floorboard. The moment felt suspended between heartbeats. From the adjoining tent came a muffled cough. Julia froze, heart hammering. She closed the scroll and leaned back against the tent pole, smoothing her tunic. The flap rustled, and the form of Private Marcus Aquila appeared, lantern in hand. His uniform bore the stains of guard duty, and his dark eyes glowed in the lantern's halo. "Optio," he whispered, voice hushed. "Lieutenant orders. The centurion requests your presence at the north rampart." Julia nodded, tucking the pouch of scrolls into her sleeve. She rose fluidly, her bare feet silent on the packed earth. Marcus led the way, careful to step around sleeping comrades. As they passed each tent, Marcus offered a respectful nod. Only when they reached the open space at the camp's edge did he speak again. "The centurion is waiting near the watchtower," he said, lifting the lantern higher to reveal the trench beyond. He said something about thoughtful, urgent matters. Julia's stomach fluttered. She brushed back a strand of hair, steadying herself. "Thank you, Marcus," she replied softly. At the north rampart, Lucius Marcellus stood beneath the torch-lit crenellations. His armor shone dully in the lantern glow, and his red cloak, draped over one shoulder, seemed darker by contrast. He turned as Julia approached, offering a subtle nod. "Optio," he greeted, voice low, quietly. "Quiet tonight." She stood before him, chest rising with controlled breaths. "Yes, centurion." Lucius gestured to the moonlit plain below. "Scout reports indicate unusual movement in the forest, but I summoned you for another reason." He extended his hand, revealing Julia's sealed scroll. "Your words gave me courage today." Julia's cheeks warmed. She accepted the scroll and inspected the wax seal, her wolf's paw imprint, still fresh. She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, their professional guises fell away, leaving only two hearts laid bare under a canopy of stars. "Yours guided me as well," she whispered, handing him her reply. He unwrapped it carefully, reading the verse aloud in a hushed tone that carried on the night breeze. As he did, Julia allowed herself to relax, her shoulders softening. Beyond the rampart, the forest stood silent and watchful. When Lucius finished, he folded her scroll and tucked it near his breastplate. "Until the next moonrise," he said, offering Julia a rare, gentle smile. She inclined her head. "Until then, centurion." As Julia turned to return to her tent, the flicker of torchlight on marble and canvas reminded her that here, between orders and watchwords, amid the stratagem of war, there existed a hidden realm of starlit stations and secret readings. In that realm, love need not fear the glare of day. The fading light of dusk painted the great arches of the aqueduct in soft shades of rose and amber, as engineer Sextus Flavius made his way along its moss-lined corridor. Each footfall on the worn stone pavement echoed like a whispered confession, carrying through the vaulted chambers where water once coursed to quench Rome's thirst. Sextus paused beneath a great arch, its keystone carved with the symbol of a dolphin and wave, an ode to the aqueduct's source far upstream. He removed his helmet, tucking it under one arm, and brushed damp tendrils of dark hair from his brow. His tunic, dyed the ochre of dried reeds, clung to his frame from hours spent inspecting lead-lined channels. Over it he wore a leather apron stained with lime and mortar, from which hung a set of iron calipers and a length of braided rope. His greaves bore the faint rust of residual water, and on his belt a small leather pouch held parchment scraps and charcoal sticks for sketching structural flaws. Yet tonight, none of these tools held his attention. In his other hand lay a folded sheet of papyrus, edged with smudges of olive oil ink. A love poem sent by Aelia, the camp's drummer. Sextus settled on a low bench carved into the aqueduct wall, locating a shallow niche where the cool stone would cradle his back. He unfolded the papyrus with reverence, careful to let the paper's fibers relax after the journey from her quarters. Above him, the arches rose like silent sentinels, and the distant murmur of running water, still flowing beneath the surface, provided a gentle lullaby. By torchlight and the last glow of day, Sextus read, softly, where arches span the sky's expanse, "My heartbeat keeps your memories dance, though columns guard our legion's line, my thoughts breach walls to claim you mine." He traced each word with his forefinger, feeling the layers of meaning etched into the papyrus. The imagery of the aqueduct, so integral to his work, wove seamlessly into her verse, transforming the very structure he maintained into a monument of affection. As he pressed the poem to his chest, a distant sound drifted through the arches, the soft clank of a water trough being drained, followed by muted voices of nocturnal sentries making their rounds. Sextus closed his eyes, letting the ambient chorus wash over him. He imagined Aelia's steady hands guiding her drumsticks, the echo of her rhythms resonating like his own heartbeat beneath the stones. He retrieved a charcoal stick from his pouch and balanced it on the ledge beside him. With deliberate strokes, he sketched a small rendition of the aqueduct's silhouette against a crescent moon, then added a pair of entwined initials, S. Highways and A. Straight Ager, in the corner. Beneath the drawing, he composed his reply in looped cursive. "Your drum's soft baritone, I hear, within these arches, crystal clear. Though empire's walls bear iron might, your voice alone eclipses night." When the final line was complete, Sextus folded the papyrus gently and tied it with a slender ribbon of crimson wool. An unconventional choice for an engineer, but one he'd stolen from a messenger's cloak. He slipped the scroll into his leather pouch, alongside spare mortar wedges and a length of fine wire for binding. Rising, he strapped on his helmet and checked the alignment of the nearby arch with his calipers, ensuring the keystone's pitch remained true. The engineer's eye returned to the curves of the structure, now resonant with personal significance. Each arch, each channel, each drop of water became a vessel carrying not only Rome's lifeblood, but also the whispered promises of two hearts. Footsteps approached from behind, and Sextus turned to see centurion Marcia Severina ascending the narrow ramp. Her armor, polished to a faint gleam in the torchlight, and her purple-striped tunic marked her high station. She paused beside him, her expression softened by the serenity of the moment. "They say these arches will stand 1,000 years, she observed quietly, voice low enough to blend with the distant drip of water. Sextus offered a wry smile. "They will, or until my own hand falters." Marcia inclined her head, glancing at the papyrus tassel peeking from his pouch. Another dispatch for the legate. He hesitated, then offered the slightest bow. A personal inspection tribune. She studied him for a heartbeat, then placed a consoling hand on his shoulder. Thoughtful. Even engineers need reminders of why we build. Before he could reply, the far-off horn of the night watch sounded, signaling the hour's end. Marcia, touched the ribbon's edge, as if she recognized its hue, then slipped away down the ramp, leaving Sextus alone with the archers. He come flow see, steadying his shoulders. Above, the stars reignited in the clear sky, their light filtering through the aqueduct's windows. Sextus paused at the archer's crown, resting his gloved hand on the cool stone. The structure's grandeur seemed to cradle him, echoing Aelia's heartfelt words back to him, in the language of geometry and stone. With careful steps, he retraced the aqueduct's path to the service entrance. There, he concealed the papyrus in a small cavity beneath the final pillar, a spot only he would remember. The ribbon's crimson edge remained visible enough for Aelia's keen eye, guiding her to retrieve his reply. As he slipped back into the camp's sleeping quarter, returning calipers to their rack and wiping mortar from his apron, Sextus felt the world shift from the realm of bricks and water to the sanctuary of shared sentiment. He laid his tools aside and knelt by his cot, pulling the ribboned pouch from beneath his armor. Drawing out the scroll once more, he held it close, breathing in the faint scent of olive oil ink and distant drums. "Until dawn's first light," he whispered into the darkness, "your verse will guide my every measure." With that, he tucked the pouch beneath his pillow and settled onto the straw mattress. Outside, the aqueduct's arches stood silent vigil, cradling both water and whispered promises until the next embrace of dusk. When the camp's hustle faded into the pre-dawn stillness, Private Quintus Allius stood sentinel atop the eastern watchtower, lantern in hand. His helmet, polished to a mirror sheen at dusk, now sat at his feet, a courtesy to comfort during the long hours of vigil. The chill air wrapped around his shoulders as he leaned against the wooden parapet, sweeping his gaze across the silvery plain below, where rows of tents lay undisturbed and the distant tree lines sighed softly. Quintus was broad-shouldered and solidly built, a veteran of 3 campaigns despite his youthful face. His lorica hamata, a chain-mail shirt, rested loosely over his tunic, the interlocking rings cool against his skin. His greaves and caligae bore the scuffs of countless marches, and a simple leather belt held his pugio at hip level. In his free hand, he held a small sheepskin scroll, rolled tightly and bound with a thin leather thong. Tonight, unlike most nights, his watch would be punctuated by more than silent observation. Beneath him, flickers of lantern light formed a muted grid as sentries patrolled the gravel paths. Their footsteps fell in soft thuds, punctuated by the occasional murmur of a comrade or the low bark of a guard dog. The scent of damp earth and river mist mingled with the faint tang of oil from the lantern's flame. All around, the frontier slept, under the watchful eyes of Rome's guardians. Yet, in Quintus's mind, a different world stirred. He perched on a low beam near a cluster of candles set in iron sconces, their flames guttering in the breeze. With deliberate care, Quintus removed one candle and placed it in a tripod holder on a small wooden crate beside him. The pale yellow glow cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, and the lantern's amber light pooled at his feet. Drawing the sheepskin scroll from his belt, Quintus unfastened the leather thong and unfurled the mapping brown parchment. Its surface bore his careful cursive, an art he'd honed in childhood under his mother's tutelage. Tonight, he would not catalogue troop movements or forage yields. Instead, he would inscribe verses for Licenia, the healer assigned to the valetudinarium, field hospital, near the Rhine's bank. He dipped his quill into a shallow ceramic ink pot, wine-dark ink that smelled faintly of oak galls, and began. When candles burn low in torchlit halls, my thoughts seek refuge where your laughter calls. Each whispered breeze along the walls bears the echo of your healing balm. The flow of his script was steady, the letters curling and looping with practiced grace. With each phrase, he tasted the memory of Licinia's warm hands, pressing herbs to a wounded shoulder, felt the soft brush as he wrote. A distant owl hooted, an answer to some silent question, and the camp's quiet rhythm continued, uninterrupted. Around the watchtower's base, a relief sentinel eyed his own scroll briefly, then returned to pacing. No one noticed Quintus's gentle hush of breath or the faint scratching of quill on parchment. When he paused, Quintus swirled the quill's tip in the inkpot to remove excess, then turned the scroll and penned his closing lines. May moonlight guide each patient's dream, and in my heart your memory gleam. Till dawn's first horn proclaims the hour, I keep your name my soul's strong tower. He dipped a fingertip into a small vial of red wax, crushed from the seeds of the arum plant, and let a single drop pool at the scroll's edge. Firmly he pressed the seal, a bronze signet ring bearing his family's crest, into the wax. The imprint of a standing pine tree, surrounded by twin stars, emerged crisply, an emblem Licinia would recognize at once. Quintus rolled the parchment back into its sheath and slipped it into his cloak's interior pocket. The candle's glow softened around him, and the lantern's flame swung gently, casting elongated shadows that stretched, like silent sentinels, across the floorboards. Below, a voice called out, "Change of watch!" A junior soldier called up from the ground. Quintus nodded, gathering his gear. He replaced the candle into its sconce, extinguished the lantern with a quick pounce of cloth, and secured the remaining candles in their holders. As he descended the narrow ladder, each rung creaked under his weight. He reached the ground with silent steps and slipped behind the rows of tents, mindful of sleeping comrades. At the edge of the camp's outer boundary, he found the small incubator tent where Licinia tended the wounded. The canvas flap was drawn back, just enough to reveal the warm glow of oil lamps and the soft moan of a convalescent. Quintus paused, heart beating with anticipation and nerves alike. He pressed his palm against the canvas and allowed the briefest moment for the wax seal's edge to catch Licinia's eye. Then he slipped away, disappearing into the camp's labyrinth before the healer could glimpse his figure. By the time he returned to his quarters, the first hint of pale light colored the eastern sky. He laid the quill and inkpot on the small wooden chest where he kept his personal effects, then removed the scroll's leather sheath and placed it beneath his pillow. The pine and star seal remained visible, a secret promise tucked under his linen bedding. Quintus stripped off his armor and tunic, dressing instead in a simple woolen shirt to ward off the night's chill. He crawled onto the straw-filled pallet, drawing the coarse blanket to his chin. Outside, the sentinel's footsteps fell into a lulling rhythm that matched the beat of his own heart. "Sleep well, Licinia," he whispered into the darkness. "May my words keep you safe until we meet again." With that, his eyes drifted closed, and the candle's final flicker faded into memory. In the hush that followed, only the soft rhythm of his breaths remained, each one a verse in the night watch narrative of a soldier's love. The aroma of simmering lentils and roasting goat drifted through the camp's central cookhouse like a warm embrace. Inside, the large iron cauldrons hung over low fires, their lids rattling slightly as the embers shifted. Camp cook, Livia Marcellana, moved between them with practiced ease, her stained apron knotted at the waist over a faded woolen tunic. The curls of her dark hair were tucked beneath a simple linen kerchief, and the corners of her eyes bore faint laugh lines, testaments to years spent feeding thousands of hungry legionaries. Tonight was the fortnightly mess hall chorus, when soldiers and support staff gathered for hearthside storytelling. But for Livia, this evening held another, more intimate purpose. Beneath a pile of clean cooking utensils at the workbench lay a folded scrap of papyrus, sealed with a smudge of beeswax and marked by the gentle curve of a pressed ring, her own token for centurion Marcus Varro. She ladled a spoonful of spiced porridge into a wooden bowl, then set it aside for the centurion's evening ration. As she worked, she murmured a line of dactylic hexameter under her breath, the opening of the love poem she had composed just before dusk. When barren pots and iron clink, my thoughts to you in whispers sink. She stirred the cauldron, the thick stew swirling like amber currents. Embers popped, sending tiny sparks dancing upward, and Livia closed her eyes to savor the moment. The heat on her face, the scent of cumin and coriander, the promise of parchment waiting later under her pillow. Across the kitchen's stone floor, legionaries queued for their bowls, their voices low with camaraderie. A veteran centurion, Marcus Varro himself, stepped forward, his red cloak dusted from patrol. His helmet was tucked under one arm, revealing close-cropped hair flecked with grey. He inclined his head to Livia in greeting, and she offered him the wooden bowl with a respectful bow. "Gracias, Livia," he said, voice gruff yet kind. She smiled, brushing flour from her cheek. "Respectfully, for you, sir, only the freshest barley and lentils." Marcus accepted the bowl, then leaned forward, just enough that no one else would hear, and said, "I await your verses tonight." Livia's heart fluttered. "Happily, they will be as warm as this stew, centurion." She turned back to the cauldron, rattling a small clay jar of garum seasoning into the mix. The tang of fermented fish filled the air, a flavor prized among soldiers for its hearty savor. Once the serving line thinned, Livia cleared a space at the long wooden table. She set down the sealed parchment, covering it with a folded cloth napkin. Then, with deliberate slowness, she arranged a few cooking implements. At last, she turned and retrieved a small oil lamp from a nearby shelf. The lamp's wick glowed with soft yellow light, casting gentle shadows on the stone walls. She poured a cup of wine from an amphora, the deep red liquid sloshing against the lip, and carried both lamp and cup to her private alcove behind the hearth. There, beside a stack of firewood, Livia set down her offerings and knelt in the cool dust. She drew the letter from beneath the napkin, breaking the wax seal with careful precision. The beeswax gave way with a and she unfolded the papyrus to reveal Marcus's own flowing script. "Your hands have fed my courage, as steel and ranks confine our feud. But in each tender spoonful lies a promise that our fates collude." She read each line aloud letting the words warm her from within. Outside, the camp's laughter dimmed as soldiers retreated to their tents, replaced by the and the of simmering broth. Livia pressed the note to her heart, fingers tracing the inked letters as though touching Marcus's own hand. Retrieving a stylus fashioned from an olive branch twig, she turned to her reply, writing in neat cursive. "When dawn breaks o'er the legion's call, recall our warmth beside these walls. Each simmer, every whispered taste, speaks of love, no distance wastes." She folded the scroll and dipped a fingertip into honey-thick wax, applying a small dollop to seal it. Using the rim of her signet ring, a simple band engraved with a bunch of grapes, she pressed the wax into a precise impression. The emblem left behind was subtle, yet unmistakable to Marcus. Livia tucked the sealed letter into the fold of her apron and extinguished the lamp, its glow swallowed by the hearth's dying embers. She rose, stacking bowl and cup on a wooden tray, and slipped into the shadows of the cookhouse's rear entrance. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. She paused by the Legion's water trough, careful to leave no footprints in the muddy stones. Beneath lantern light, Marcus emerged from his tent, adjusting the folds of his cloak. He spotted Livia approaching and offered "Your meal was invigorating," he said. Livia placed the tray into his hands. "And your words were the sweetest seasoning." She brushed past him, leaving the cookhouse behind with the of her footsteps on stone. Marcus watched her go, lifting the folded parchment from his cloak's inner pocket. Under the starlit sky, he broke the wax seal and unfolded her reply, reading by the lantern's glow. A smile curved his lips as he pressed the letter to his chest. And for a moment, the fortress walls, the smoky kitchens, and the iron discipline of Rome faded away, replaced by the simple bond of hearthside refrains and camp kitchen confessions. The hush of dawn settled over the crumbling stone cloisters of the hermitage, where once battle-scarred legionaries now whispered prayers and psalms. Sunbeams slanted through arched windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced above rows of simple wooden benches. Here, amidst vine-choked walls and the scent of incense, stood Serenus Marcellus, a former centurion turned brother in the monastic order. His hair was shorn close to the scalp, and his weathered face bore the lines of both war and penance. Draped in a coarse wool habit, the rope cincture at his waist held a small leather satchel containing quills, parchment scraps, and his most treasured trove, love poems sent by soldiers still on the frontier. Each morning, before the first bell of prime, Serenus would retire to the scriptorium, a vaulted alcove lined with shelves of faded codices and scrolls. There, he pored over dispatches and poetry alike, offering silent blessings as he transcribed the verses into illuminated manuscripts. Today, he knelt at a low wooden desk, the amber glow of an oil lamp flickering across vellum and ink. A fresh scroll lay before him, its margin already inscribed with careful Latin script. Within these halls of chant and shade, my sword becomes a quiet blade, yet still my heart, in verse set free, beats its song for only thee. These lines, penned by Lucius Marcellus from the north ramparts, chronicled the officer's longing for Optio Julia Domitia. Serenus traced each curve, a soft Deo gratias, before dipping his quill into dark brown ink. He then copied the poem onto a clean vellum leaf, illuminating the initial letter, W, with a delicate border of ivy leaves and tiny crosses. As he worked, the hermitage's prior, Brother Cornelius, entered silently. Cloaked in white linen, Cornelius carried a carved wooden bowl filled with water and fresh laurel leaves, offerings for the day's ritual. He paused at Serenus's side, observing the intricate script. "Brother," Cornelius whispered, "these verses bear the passion of the world beyond our cloister. Shall we send them on sacred wings?" Serenus nodded, brushing a speck of ink from his habit. "They seek neither glory nor spoils, only the promise of union." He rolled the illuminated scroll and tied it with crimson thread, an echo of the camp's standards. "Place this in the courier's bundle at Vespers. It will reach the watchtower by midnight." Cornelius, smiling, smiled, lifting the scroll with reverent care. "So shall penitent hearts rekindle hope beneath the stars." He turned and slipped away down the aisle, wooden sandals echoing softly on flagstones. Left alone, Serenus rose and stretched his stiff limbs. The abbey bells tolled prime, and he crossed to a narrow window overlooking terraced gardens. There, thyme, rosemary, and lavender grew in neat rows, their fragrances mingling with the morning air. He inhaled deeply, recalling the scent of campfires and leather saddles, a memory both distant and dear. From his satchel, he withdrew an unopened love scroll from Marcus Severus, dated 2 nights prior. He cracked the wax seal, a stylized wolf's paw intertwined with a lotus, then read aloud in a hushed tone. "Though cloistered walls enclose your days, my drum's soft cadence finds your gaze. In every psalm and silent prayer, I send my love through sacred air." Serenus closed the scroll, pressing it to his heart. He then drafted his response on clean vellum, mixing sacred and secular imagery, crosses entwined with oak boughs, stylized drum motifs, and the intertwined initials S.A.J. ironed violently. His words blended theology and longing. "Your drumbeat's grace, O friend in arms, resounds within these hallowed farms. May peace you seek, and love you right, illumine both your heart and night." Folding the scroll, he sealed it with a dab of beeswax pressed by a small silver crucifix, a token both holy and personal. He tucked it into his satchel just as the mid-morning sunlight climbed higher, warming the cloister's stones. Outside, a procession of monks carried torches for the day's mass. Serenus joined them, passing along the cloister walk, where alcoves held statues of martyrs and saints. Each step felt lighter than the heavy boots he once wore, yet the weight of camaraderie and compassion remained steadfast within him. At Vespers, the courier, a grizzled lay brother named Paulus, knelt before Serenus. With a nod, Serenus handed over the scrolls bound in crimson and beeswax. "Speed them well, brother," he whispered. "Carry the hope of two hearts across the frontier night." Paulus accepted the bundle and rose, lantern swinging gently. As he departed through the arched doorway, Serenus watched the light fade down the path, the echoes of prayers drifting behind him. In the scriptorium's quiet warmth, Serenus returned to his desk, ready to transcribe the next dispatch of love and loss. Each verse that passed through his hands was a testament to the enduring human spirit, a bridge between soldier and sanctuary, between steel and soul. The clamour of war drums and the din of mangonel fire reverberated against the cracked stones of the besieged fort. Around the shattered tower of Castra Aureliana, earthworks smouldered and wooden palisades splintered under enemy assault. Within this maelstrom stood Cornelianus Drusus, a young legionary promoted for bravery, his once gleaming armour streaked with blood and ash. His gallia lay beside him on broken tile, replaced by a simple iron skullcap that bore the hammer marks of battlefield repairs. Cornelianus had fought through 3 days of relentless siege. The air was thick with dust and the acrid tang of burning pitch. Yet, at his belt, secured beneath his sword scabbard, rested a small piece of broken amphora, its surface inscribed with his name and that of his beloved, Valeria. Carved during a fleeting lull, it bore this couplet: "While walls collapse and banners fall, your memory stands stronger than all." Now, as twilight bled into night, Cornelianus crept into the ruined tower's upper chamber. The floor was littered with shattered beams and embers, but at its centre lay a single beam of moonlight, unbroken by smoke. He knelt there, retrieving a fresh shard of amphora and a flint stylus from his breast pouch. His hands, slick with sweat and grime, traced the vessel's curved surface. He chipped away at the amphora's edge until it yielded a smooth panel, just large enough for a few lines of verse. With careful precision, he incised, "Beneath the siege's ruthless cry, your voice remains my battle cry. In every horn and dying plea, your name alone brings victory." Each strike of the stylus echoed faintly in the chamber, a quiet heartbeat amid chaos. Cornelianus paused to inhale, tasting the coppery tang of blood and the ghostly sweetness of crushed berries when scouts foraged nearby. He pressed his palm to the carving, feeling its ridged letters under his fingers, each one a promise, hardened by conflict. Footsteps shattered the hush. From the stairwell emerged Tullia Marcella, the fortress's medic archivist, her linen robes smeared with blood moss poultices. Her dark braid was undone, cascading over one shoulder, and her soft brown eyes were focused, yet haunted. She carried a battered satchel of salves and cupping vessels, and at her wrist hung a length of crimson ribbon, Cornelianus's standard marker. "Tullia," he whispered, rising. The shard he held glinted like a broken star in the moonbeam. "I hoped you'd come." She offered a wan smile, kneeling beside him. "I waited until the belfry fell silent," she said, voice low. She unwrapped the ribbon and gently threaded it through 2 holes he'd drilled at the amphora's edge. "Now it's marked as mine." Cornelianus sat back on his heels and handed her a scrap of dried parchment, his reply, penned earlier on a piece of supply order scroll. Its lines read, "When flaming arrows streak the sky, your hand's touch bids my fears die. Though siege towers threaten our reprieve, your love's the bastion I believe." Tullia pressed the parchment to her heart, the candlelight from below flickering through the shattered wall. She caressed the carved amphora and parchment both, binding them together with the ribbon as Cornelianus had imagined. two tokens fused in a moment of shared resolve. Beyond the broken window, enemy torches bobbed in the darkness, and the low roar of siege engines grew louder. Cornelianus rose, slipping his sword back into place. He placed a steady hand on Tullia's shoulder. Voice firm, "Tomorrow's assault will test us anew," he said, voice firm despite the tremor in his chest. "But tonight, we hold as one." Tullia nodded, wiping a smear of salve from her cheek. "Steadily, together," she replied, her voice steadier than the rumble outside. She tucked the ribboned bundle into her satchel, then reached into her robes for a tiny clay vial. Murmuring, "For protection," she murmured, handing it to him. Inside lay a pinch of crushed laurel, believed to ward off harm. Cornelianus accepted the vial with solemn gratitude. He clasped it around the hilt of his sword and bowed his head. Quietly, "May Fortuna favor us," he intoned quietly. They lingered in the quiet chamber for a heartbeat, two figures united by hope amid ruin. Then Tullia rose, dusting embers from her robes, and Cornelianus straightened his iron skullcap. Together they slipped down the tower's staircase, medicine and steel entwined, ready to face the night's renewed fury. As dawn's rosy fingers brushed the white marble columns of the legion's headquarters, Tribune Marcia Severina entered the office of the legate with measured purpose. The air inside smelled of beeswaxed scrolls and imported cedar, luxuries that marked her station among Rome's elite. Draped in a pristine linen tunic, embroidered with purple stripes, the Praetorian mark of rank, she carried a polished wooden desk box filled with dispatches destined for the Senate in Rome. Each scroll bore the imperial seal and detailed the legion's movements, supply inventories, and intelligence from the frontier. Marcia placed the box atop the heavy oak table, its carved lion's paws resting on soft, rush-mat flooring. She turned to the legate, a stern-faced veteran named Lucius Aemilius, his silver hair cropped short beneath his helmet. He nodded curtly, then beckoned her to present the first bundle. Her fingertips brushed the edges of the neatly rolled scrolls, each tied with crimson ribbon and stamped with the Aquila emblem. Soldiers had spent weeks gathering the minutiae, grain quantities, troop rotations, local tribal allegiances. But Marcia carried her own private charge, a hidden missive for her husband, Centurion Quintus Severus, stationed 3 provinces away. Lucius unsealed the first dispatch, scanning the neat columns of Latin text, describing skirmishes along the Danube. Marcia watched his keen, grey eyes flit over the lines of official report that masked a softer undercurrent. When he moved on to the second scroll, she seized the moment. With deft fingers, she lifted the third dispatch and slipped it back into her box, replacing it with a nearly identical scroll upon which she had forged the imperial seal herself. This fake dispatch, outwardly indistinguishable, contained 2 parts. The first half was an exact copy of the genuine report, regiment movements, forage requisitions, and a summary of the latest espionage gleaned from barbarian merchants. It was the perfect camouflage. In the margin of the second half, Marcia had penned a brief postscript, an elegiac couplet dedicated not to Rome but to Quintus. "My dearest heart, though distance claims our days, each moon I count the nights till homeward gaze." She rolled the scroll with meticulous care, tying it with the same crimson ribbon that adorned the others. Her seal, a small impression of 2 interlocked rings, was pressed into the wax just as confidently as the Aquila crest. Only she knew which impression belonged to which destinies. Marcia lifted the desk box and approached the heavy bronze door, its surface engraved with scenes of past triumphs. She paused before departing, inhaling the sharp scent of ink and leather. Somewhere in Rome, her husband would break open this scroll, expecting the latest orders from the Praetorian Guard. Instead, he would find her words, her heart laid bare on papyrus. Aurelia slipped her hand inside the satchel, retrieving the scroll. Gaius watched as she unknotted the leather thong, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. She broke the wax seal, a delicate impression of 2 intertwined laurel branches, feeling the fragment crack beneath her touch. Unfolding the parchment, she read the opening lines aloud. Softly. My dearest Aurelia, beneath foreign skies, I write. Of countless nights spent dreaming of your light, though miles and duty pulled our paths apart, no distance dims the fervor of my heart. Her voice wavered on the last word, and Gaius crossed the small space to stand beside her. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder as she continued, more confidently. Each sunrise found me longing for your face, each moonlit hour a marker of your grace. Now, at last, I stand within our city's walls, eager to answer love's unyielding calls. Tears glistened at the corners of Aurelia's eyes. She folded the parchment carefully, tracing the final flourish of his signature, Gaius, ever yours, with a fingertip. Then she looked up at him, her gaze clear and unwavering, softly. You kept this safe all the way from the Rhine. Gaius inclined his head, thoughtfully. Every night I pressed it against my chest, beneath my armor. I promised I would return before the next harvest moon. I've arrived days early. Aurelia smiled through her tears and slipped her arms around his waist. The crowd on the landing dissolved into background hum as they embraced, soldier and beloved reunited. Behind them, children paused in their play to watch the scene with quiet fascination, and a nearby merchant offered Gaius a congratulatory nod. Within the apartment's small atrium, vines wound through an open lattice, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air. Aurelia led Gaius inside, guiding him to the low stone bench where they had first met 3 years prior, when Gaius was newly posted to Rome's Praetorian camp. She laid the scroll on the marble seat, its edges curled even after the journey, and reached to draw a simple bronze stylus from her own belt. Since your departure, she began, I've crafted my reply in secret. She drew a breath and unrolled another sheet of papyrus, its surface faintly scented with myrrh oil. Gaius watched as she read aloud. Gaius, my heart kept faithful guard, amidst the empty rooms we shared. Each dawn I rose to pray your name, and by that hope found morning's flame. As she spoke, Aurelia's voice steadied, each verse a testament to love's endurance. Gaius reached out, brushing charcoal from the papyrus and kissing her wrist. She continued, Now you return with sword laid down, to trade the helmet for my crown. Let futures bloom where memories lie, and love be Rome's bright canopy. When she finished, Gaius drew the stylus across the blank margin, adding his own flourish, a single heart bound by a laurel wreath. He dipped his fingertip into crimson wax, pressing the same intertwined laurel seal onto her letter. Aurelia covered his hand with hers, warmth passing between them as the wax set. They stood cradling each other, and Aurelia placed Gaius's scroll into a bronze casket on the narrow shelf above the bench, a vessel meant for keepsakes. She tucked her reply beside it. Outside, a neighbor began sweeping the steps, but for the couple, the world had narrowed to the soft echo of dawn and the promise of shared tomorrows. Later, as citizens thronged toward the temple of Jupiter for morning sacrifices, Gaius and Aurelia walked hand in hand through the cobbled streets. He carried his cuirass over his arm, and she guided him past familiar landmarks. The fountain where children splashed, the baker's oven spitting flour, the lined facade of the Senate House. Each location held a memory made richer by his return. At the Tiber's edge, they paused beneath a marble statue of Romulus and Remus. Gaius turned to Aurelia, drawing a small linen-wrapped bundle from his satchel. Inside lay a braided bracelet of gold and onyx, a gift he had acquired in the province of Hispania, a token of unity and protection. He clasped it around her wrist, his fingers lingering as he whispered, "May it guard your heart, as this letter guarded mine." Aurelia raised her hand to admire the bracelet in the morning sun. "I shall cherish it," she promised, "as I cherish you." With that, Gaius deposited his satchel at her feet, and they strolled forward into the city's thrumming heart. Built on stories of conquest, devotion, and above all, the enduring power of the written word. As the final embers of the frontier campfire glowed like embattled stars, Centurion Gaius Marcellus stood once more on the rampart's crest, the sprawling wilderness of Germania fading into the pre-dawn mist. His armor, polished and mended countless times, reflected the lantern's soft light. Over his broad shoulders hung his crimson sagum, now threadbare at the edges from travels and trials. In his gauntleted hand he held a rolled scroll, delicate papyrus edged in crimson wool that carried Valeria's farewell message. Gaius inhaled deeply, tasting the cool air heavy with dew and pine resin. This eve marked the end of his posting on the Limes Castorum. Rome had summoned his century to Jubileum, the great festival in the capital, and soon he would bear Valeria's words back across half the empire. He paused at the parapet's crenellation, recalling the first time he penned his love beneath this same moonlight, reckless with longing and uncertain hope. The camp lay silent below, tents shuttered against the chill. Only the distant snore of a sentry's drum and the soft rustle of leather boots breaking camp stirred the night's hush. Gaius unwrapped the scroll and read, "My Gaius, as dawn breaks on our paths anew, remember each twilight I waited for you. Though miles may stretch like echoes long, our love endures in every song." He pressed the scroll to his chest, the papyrus warm against his armor. The final lines were underlined twice, a rare flourish in her measured hand, affirming her steadfast devotion. Despite orders that forbade lingering attachments, he had carried her verses as faithfully as any standard. Now their words would journey on without him, until their reunion at Rome's marble gates. Descending the ladder, Gaius found Lucius Fabius and Aelia Carina, scribe and drummer, gathering supplies for the march. Their eyes met his in the lantern glow, each offering a knowing nod. Lucius held out a small wax tablet, inkside hidden, thoughtfully. "May these moments carve our hearts in time, until we greet again in the capital's clime." Aelia offered a final drumstick tap against her tabor, a soft dactyl echoing the first beat of dawn. Their private farewells, exchanged in poetry and percussion, bound them beyond the frontier's reach. As the century assembled, Gaius guided his men along the winding path toward the main gate. Each step carried him farther from the wild forests and unending watch, closer to marble forums and crowded streets. Along the road, he encountered companions whose own love stories lingered in hidden parchments. Lucilla the engineer, her secret letters to the tribune carried in blueprint tubes. Titus the recruit, whose shield boss bore embossed vows, and Quintus Aelius, whose night watch narrative still glowed in candlelit script. At midday they paused by a broad river, the drawbridge lowered across its breadth. Gaius used the respite to seal Valeria's scroll with his signet ring, its twin laurel branches L. When the column resumed, the countryside shifted from dense woodland to rolling fields dotted with farmsteads. Gaius's thoughts drifted to Rome's white marble edifices, the Temple of Saturn where he would present Valeria's verses, the Forum where he would finally speak her name aloud without fear of censure. By evening, the soldiers reached the outskirts of the provincial town of Mogontiacum, modern Mainz, where fresh recruits and veterans alike celebrated the eve before departure. Torches flickered along timber-framed inns, and ale flowed in clay cups. Gaius paused outside an inn's wooden door, the laughter and song spilling onto the cobbles. He hesitated, wishing for a moment's revelry, yet bound by the weight of his mission. Lucius approached, raising a cup of spiced wine. "To the capital," he toasted, voice hushed so only Gaius could hear, "and to the scrolls that carry our hearts." Gaius clinked cups and downed the wine, letting its warmth spread. He remembered Valeria's caution, "Drink wisely, my centurion." He smiled, imagining her scolding tones softened by affection. That night, under a sky brushed with early stars, Gaius found a quiet courtyard behind the inn. He unrolled Valeria's scroll again, illuminated by moonlight. With careful hand, he added his own final stanza in bold, firm script. "When Rome beholds these words I send, know this farewell is only to bend. the road that leads me back to you, where love's true dawn will greet us too." He sealed the parchment once more and laid it atop his pack. As he closed his eyes, the distant church bells tolled midnight, their resonant peals carrying through the still air like echoes of fate. The next morning, the century resumed the march at first light. Gaius moved among his men, checking their formations and offering quiet encouragement. Each face reflected anticipation and resolve. Rome awaited them all. Yet none bore the quiet trepidation that Gaius felt, carrying the personal weight of promise. At the city gates of Mogontiacum, he entrusted Valerius' scroll to the courier attached to their legion. An experienced rider bound for Rome, sworn to carry dispatches. Gaius watched the courier mount his steed, the scroll tied securely to the saddle, before turning back to his men. "Strong, forward," he called, voice strong. The legion advanced as one, steel and sagum, marching in unity toward history's heart. In the weeks that followed, Gaius led his century across Gaul's verdant fields and the Alps' snow-swept passes. Messages from the courier arrived at intervals, brief notes confirming safe passage of each letter. With each confirmation, Gaius felt Valeria's presence at his side, a silent companion through mountain mists and sun-drenched valleys. Finally, after days of relentless journey, they crested the rolling hills outside Rome. The city's marble silhouette gleamed in the afternoon light, domes and columns rising against a cerulean sky. Gaius surmounted his horse and gazed upon the sight that had fueled countless verses in his heart. The legion rested outside the Servian wall, and Gaius descended to stand before the Porta Capena. He retrieved Valeria's scroll from his sagum and held it aloft, sunlight igniting its woolen edges. Around him, veteran soldiers murmured in wonder. The centurion, known for stoic resolve, now cradled a love letter like a sacred relic. A procession of aides and couriers awaited. Gaius stepped forward, presenting the scroll to his aide, Tribune Julia Domitia, whose eyes widened. She bowed her head in respect, understanding the moment's gravity. Softly, "With these words," Gaius said softly, "I return not just my service, but my heart." She nodded and signaled the courier. The messenger spurred his horse, vanishing into the city's veins, with Valeria's verses destined for her eyes. Gaius exhaled sharply, the weight lifting from his chest. Around him, his men dropped their packs, forging bonds anew in the presence of empire's majesty and personal victory. He closed his eyes, letting the hush of Rome's outskirts settle around him. In that silence, he felt the whisper of a promise fulfilled. Ink and armor, duty and desire at last reconciled, beneath the eternal city's dawn.